Hello everybody and welcome to Forever Sports. And today we're going to be taking a bit of a trip down memory lane and basically looking at what has happened to my franchise, my union, that is the Lions, and how we have gone from three Super Rugby titles in a row, a Currie Cup title in 2015, to basically being a name on a log. That's basically what we are these days in basically 7 years, and the continued sort of degradation of a union, which should be one of the proudest unions of the country and has no reason why it shouldn't be one of the top two, not unions in the country and one of the top four sides in the URC. I genuinely believe that. Transvaal's always been a strong union, and we've got the talent within Gauteng. The Lions junior structures are really, really strong. At Craven Week, for example, the Lions teams are always very competitive. We've got some of the best rugby schools in the country within the Lions network, and yet we are seeing a team that is just slowly disintegrating into nothing because of bad administration, mismanagement, and a lack of vision, and a bit of an old boys club, I personally think, that is just driving this union into the ground. So we're basically looking at a look back at exactly how we went from those three Super Rugby titles to nowhere near qualifying for URC playoffs and basically occupying a space. And if you start to look at players in, players out, what's happened over the years, it all starts to really make sense why things have gone the way they have. So before we get into it, please do smash like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. The good old days, Warren Whiteley at the helm of a Lions side. This was the final Super Rugby final we were in. We obviously were in 2018, 17, and 16. Two under Johan Ackermann, one under Swayze de Brain. Coming up short. The big one was obviously the one at Ayers Park, where Quack Smith got that red card. But those are the days, wasn't it? Malcolm Marx, Franco Mostert, Elton Jantjies, Quacker Smith, Jaco Creel, Warren Whiteley, Johan Jans van Rensburg, Andrew Kutsia, Ruan Comrie, Kortel Skosan. You could just list off so many players who went on to play for the Springboks, maybe in a poor Springboks side. Not, I don't think, necessarily to their fault, just kind of situation they were in. But from there, you think of whether, and I think the frustrating thing is how quickly things fell apart. So let's dive through it. So to end of 2018, big things start to happen. We lose the Super Rugby final for the third time in a row, and changes start to happen. First of all, this was the big change. So that final was the end of the Swayze de Brain era, and him and Johan Ackermann basically built that Lions team. Post John Mitchell, they built the Lions team into what it was, and it was an incredibly strong team. As I said, won the Currie Cup in 2015, which was then the launch pad for those finals in 16, 17, 18. And then Ivan van Ooyen gets appointed as the Lions head coach. He was a strength and conditioning coach before. Quite a controversial appointment, appointing within, going with somebody who knows the structure, but not somebody who had head coach experience. The big thing, I think, was starting to see the players moving on. We had Warren Whiteley already retired, for example, but Ruan Dreyer leaving, Corne Ferry, Jacques van Ooyen, Andries Ferreira, Franco Mostert, Jack Creel, Johan van Rensburg. Those were sort of all players who basically featured in the final and were sort of mainstays in that kind of side. Particularly those last three names, Franco Mostert, Jaco Creel, and Rowan Jans van Rensburg. They were phenomenal in that season ahead. And then the big one, Swayze de Brain leaves. This is the season the Lions then have. Now, bearing in mind, the likes of Malcolm Marx are still around. Your Elton Jantjies is still around. They're still very good players in that side. But unfortunately, under Ivan van Ooyen, they don't deliver. And we end up coming fourth within the SA log, just beating the Stormers. But we basically just didn't feature at all, really, in that 2019 Super Rugby. And then the worst thing that ever happened to the Lions happened, and that was 2020, which was COVID. And unfortunately, what happened with the Lions is that what happened to all sides, really, but affected Lions more than others, is that during COVID or after COVID, SA Rugby were in financial turmoil, really. And they basically gave all players within the South African system an opportunity to basically walk out on their contracts and to take opportunities overseas. And this is who the Lions lost. I mean, how's that for a list? I mean, Robbie Kutsia, Malcolm Marx, Lawrence Erasmus, Stephen Levis, Quacker Smith, James Fenton, Lionel Pooh, Ruan Comrie, Harold Forster, Pierre Dianti. He was suspended, not Amadosh Tambwe. Those were all sort of the main sort of players. And it's a huge list that left. And all of a sudden, we got a bit of a shadow of a squad that Ivan van Ooyen actually had to work with. And I think this is the big thing, And we continue to struggle. Obviously, when you lose these kind of players, you do. And during that sort of Super Rugby Unlocked, yes, a very abbreviated tournament, the Lions managed just one win. Actually finished behind the Cheetahs. and with 12 points. It was a horrendous performance. But to be fair, it was like a brand new team. It was like all these youngsters that we didn't really know what to do with, and things weren't going well. 2021, we started to make a few signings. We brought in Edel van der Merwe, Snell Nahamba, JP Smith back from Australia, and it was the first sort of step forward, really, in terms of being able to bring a few players in. But again, we were continuously losing players. Mona Skuman, Hachiva Diamani, we all saw what he did at Stormers. Joey Lombard was a massive one. You know, Elton Jantjies was in between sort of Japan and the likes of that, sort of came and left quite often. But Joey Lombard was the big fly-off sort of to be, and at the time was a massive loss to the Lions. Cordos Hassan, you know, one of our record try scorers, also moving on. Nathan Macbeth going to Scotland. So that led to in our first URCS not having a particularly good squad and finishing 12. It was panic stations at the time, and even Van Rooyen was very close to getting the sack. We went a different route. We appointed a really good support staff for him, and they added Albert van den Berg as a forwards coach, Ricardo Lopes as attack coach, and Jacques Fourie as a defense coach, with Julian Redding-Hayes as the scrum coach. And all of a sudden, we felt that Ivan van Rooyen had been given a bit of backing. You know, he'd been given a bit of experience in the coaching staff. He'd been given something to work with. Then it comes to our sort of signings. And this is, again, we start to see the trend over here, and this was the problem. So just before that season, at the end of that season, we lost Birger Odendaal, who was playing terrific rugby, went over to the Premiership. Vincent Tuka was borderline the URC player of the season, was winning player of the matches week in, week out, and Carly Sardi also left. We lost our three best players. Wanasila Similani as well was playing incredibly well, so we lost proper players. We did manage to start bringing in a couple of players, but nothing in comparison. You know, Marius Lowe was a big signing at the time because he was starting for the Sharks, but JC Pretorius made the move to sevens. You're only really seeing him now. But Andrew Gutierrez came back from Benton, Ruan Smith back from the US, but we weren't making like-for-like signings. We weren't bringing in, you know, Vincent Tuka was one of the top performers in URC. We brought in JC Pretorius, who was quite new to the setup. Birger Odendaal was playing terrific rugby. Marius Lowe, you know, was I don't think was at his best for the Sharks at the time. And, you know, losing Carly Sardi, who was basically on the brink of playing Springboks, bringing in Ruan Smith. They are direct replacements, but the quality gap was a big one. But there was improvement. And pipped to the line by the Sharks by 3 points, and we managed to get into 9th, you know, 1 off the 8th. So there we saw improvement. But what we needed to do at the time is to take a step forward. Now, during this time, we also saw the issues coming within the union itself. All of a sudden, we had these stories about there just being no money, players not being able to do laundry when they're on tour, players eating hot dogs, you know, for lunches because there was no money. And that's when you start to really see that there's a union in trouble. And we started to see unions exploited. You know, Vincent Tuka, Carlos Sardi both going to the Sharks. Wanasila Similani going to the Bulls. They were making lateral moves. They weren't going overseas. We go back to, for example, these over here. A lot of these moves were overseas moves, but now you're seeing far more lateral moves, which sort of shows you that the Lions just can't keep their players even within a South African environment. But there was improvement. Once again, end of the season, we brought in a couple of players, but the main thing for this season is for the first time, you know, in the last sort of 5-10 years, we didn't lose massive players apart from Jaco Creel, who retired, and Steve Satori. Peter Janssen Furen, you know, there and thereabout, but wasn't a huge loss. But here, we thought, right, okay, we've brought in Kate Volter, interesting signing. Eric O'Neill, Richard Creel, Conrad van Furen, not amazing signings. Again, you know, when you're losing a Vincent Tuka, Bergen, Urda, Carly Sardi, and a season later, you're still not bringing in, you know, big name signings. But that was the Lions' way, bringing in players that they could then sort of take up to another level. But the main thing is, for this season, didn't lose a lot of players. Once again, we improved on the log. And the annoying thing is, you know, I think this is, you know, Ospreys won that stupid last game against the Stormers, and the Stormers are absolutely horrendous too. And if it wasn't for them, the Lions would have finished 8th. They were the better side, to be honest, I think, over the course of the tournament. But it finished tied 8th and only didn't go through due to one fewer win. They had a better points difference. I mean, look at the fact that there was over 100 points difference between the two teams, and the Lions go out and Ospreys go through. I mean, it was ridiculous. It really was ridiculous. But that was last season, and you felt, oh, jeepers, you're so close. And again, we saw a building phase. We saw players come through like Henk van Wyk, Franco Horn taking things up to another level, Morne van den Berg, Ruan Venter. All of a sudden, all these young players the Lions have invested in, starting to see the fruits of the labor. We then lost Jordan Hendrickson, Iman Tuka, Ruan Dreas, Nel Nahamba sort of during the season, Henry Sergil. Now, once again, you've built a side that's really quite competitive, and then you lose Jordan Hendrickson just make a Springbok debut. Emmanuel Tuka, who had stepped in and was basically Vintage Tuka 2.0. And you brought in players who just aren't the same sort of quality, unfortunately. Tuima Fu has turned out to be a nice player, but look at the players leaving versus the players coming in. This is where we currently sit. At the time of recording, we're sitting at 31 points, 3 games to go, a maximum of 46 points available, which if we got, wouldn't be much worse than previous seasons, but the Lions fell off at the end of the day. And the main thing is, this is who we've already lost going into the off-season. Once again, you've lost Edel van der Merwe, your Springbok. You've lost Marius Lowe, one of your captains. Sanena Hamba during the season made a move. So the Lions continue to just basically, again, it's degrading and just sort of continues to start crumbling. And we're starting to see the cracks. We're starting to players shouting at each other, for example. It doesn't look like a healthy environment. And my big question is how this man is still in charge. The Lions are run terribly. There's no money. There is no money for signings. There is no money to compete with other players. And yet nothing changes. We play in a stadium that we cannot fill. We will never fill Ellis Park. Ever. It's too big. It's in a bad area. We're not playing rugby to bring people to the park. It's a disaster. And the Lions have not made any changes, structural changes to the managing group, to the ownership model, to anything in the last decade. And as a result, this union is bleeding, and we squeeze every last penny out of it, and there's just nothing left. And until there are changes, we're not going to see anything else. Ivan van Rooyen, he's an interesting one because I like the guy. I think he's a really nice guy, and I think it's difficult to. I don't think he's good enough. I don't think that we're sitting there with the best coach in South Africa, for example, or anything near. But again, he's got no support. I think we've got a good coaching staff. I think Ricardo Loach is a great coach. I think Jacques Fourie has definitely added a lot to this Lions side. I think Julian Redlinghuyse is producing props, left, right, and centre. But where's the support? John Plumtree is getting every single possible player he could possibly want. Dobbo is getting Kubas Reinach back. They're keeping Sasha. They're keeping Marnie. They're keeping Damien. They brought Steven Kitsov back and then he got injured, unfortunately. But they've brought so many players into that Stormers side. A Ruben van Heerden, for example, a JD Schickling coming back. They're building a squad that they can use. What do the Lions have to use? Next to nothing. And until that changes, we're not going to see anything change. So this man needs to be held to account. The fact that we just don't ever hear from him, he doesn't front up to the media, there's no communication whatsoever coming from the Lions. And what is SA Rugby doing? SA Rugby are busy assisting bringing Sia Khaleesi back from France, for example, and all these other moves. When does SA Rugby stand up and say, we actually take Lions task? The problem is the Lions are, in inverted commas, run well in terms of they don't make a massive loss. They kind of balance the books. So they're not going to go into administration like the Western Province did and Stormers did. But when are we going to start getting results? There's so much talent that they're losing from the country because the Lions just aren't quite there. Now, I don't think the Cheetahs, for example, are good enough to replace the Lions. I don't think that would be the solution, for example. But until we start seeing people willing to start making changes at the union, we're not going to see the Lions compete where they are. We have got the talent to have all 4 of our sides in that top 8 of the URC. I have no doubt about that. I genuinely think we've got all 4 sides are good enough to be in that top 8, which would be hell of impressive, And this is the thing, the Lions aren't dreadful in the URC. They're having a bad season this season, but if they win their last 3 games, which at home, which against Connacht is going to be tough, but they'll finish about 9th or 10th or 11th, for example. So then you're thinking, well, you've got 3 sides in the top 8 and Lions sitting around 10th, 11th. That's not bad. When are the Lions going to start competing? Because we've got the talent and we've got the ability to. And, it's a union when they've played well, have really entertained. And this is the thing. They became such a cool team to watch for years because they were so exciting to watch. But unfortunately, it's been allowed to basically just disintegrate and nothing's been done. Will we see any change? I don't know. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments below. Smash a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve. I'll chat to you soon.